This video is going to be my reaction and evaluation of Seattle's draft class for 2026. I think there's a lot to say about what John Schneider, the front office, Mike Macdonald valued, the positions they went after. I think there's perfect alignment here between need at running back, a safety corner, and even offensive guard with Bo Stevens. I think that was a spectacular move, trading up. I think they traded a 2027 a fourth rounder to get back into the fifth. Cleveland was really busy, and in this case, I think it was Cleveland who gave up that pick 148 or 149 for John Schneider and those guys to take Bo Stevens. I like what they did in this draft. I think it's interesting that they came in with 4 picks and left with 8. I will be honest with you and up front. Some of those guys in the 6th and 7th round, we don't have a whole lot of evaluation or film of them on our website, draftsignal.pro. I will spend the bulk of this discussion talking about Jadarion Price, Bud Clark, Julian Neil, who I like a lot, to be honest with you, and then Bo Stevens. Andre Fuller got some familiarity with because he played corner at Toledo, the same school Emmanuel McNeil Warren played safety at, and of course he got taken by the Browns. So I've seen film of Fuller, and I think I do think he's good value and talent for a 7th round pick. I should say it doesn't really matter necessarily in Seattle because they got so many talented guys at corner between Josh Jobe, Witherspoon, and now Julian Neil, Nehemiah Pritchett, Fuller, and all of those guys. I like the fact that they took 2 corners in the 7th round. Maybe those guys try to battle it out to get on the roster or the practice squad, if you will. I'll talk about first Jadarion Price, who obviously was the selection or the pick at the end of the 1st round. And I'm going to use our site, draftsignal.pro, to refer to it. At the time that he is taken, at pick 32, the following players have gone off the board in the previous 4 or 5 picks. Right, first, Chris Johnson, the corner from San Diego State that was rumored to possibly be headed to Seattle. Peter Woods, D-tackle from Clemson, went to the Chiefs. I'm not saying that John Schneider was going to pick him, but a talented defensive tackle who lost some weight this year for whatever reason and didn't have as explosive a film, nonetheless ended up being a 1st round pick. Keldrick Falk, I don't really think was a match for Seattle, in my opinion. Got issues with getting off the ball, basically slow, inconsistent get off, in my opinion, number 1. Number 2, going to have a whole lot of difficulty, I think, getting on the field as an edge defender in Seattle in pass rush situations. Along that regard, the players that I see taken in the next 6, 8, 10 picks after Price goes off, as far as value or possible value in Seattle, right? Chase Bisontis, the guard, Texas A&M, and then a whole bunch of edge defenders. T.J. Parker, R. Mason Thomas goes 40 to the Chiefs, Cassius Howe 41 to the Bengals in the AFC North again. In addition, Colton Hood, the corner. So you've got guard, corner, edge defender taken after Jadarion Price. I'm sure that Seattle did try to trade back, and they just, for whatever reason, couldn't find a partner. I'll be honest with you. I love this pick of Jadarion Price. Like, no reason to mess around with it and wait. Well, they didn't get the trade back option. If they could have traded back to, let's say, 38 and recouped another 4th rounder or something like that, then, maybe that would have worked out for Schneider. The 4.49 and the 40, his play speed on the field is a lot faster. You can see that from the big plays that he's generated. I think he's efficient as a receiving threat. I think there was only 15 catches on film of him, and we put them all, or not all, a lot of them on our website. It's the link in the bottom right of his page. When you go to each player profile page, you have to scroll down to get to the film. Maybe formatting wise we'll change that in the future, but the first link or the first video is a ton of explosive runs from Price, and I just think he plays faster than a 4.49. I believe he only had 15 catches in 2025. I see potential there for Jadarion Price. I like the group that they've got. George Halani, Zach Charbonnet, if and when he returns from the injury in 2026, and then Emmanuel Wilson, who was with the Packers. I've seen Emmanuel Wilson a handful of times, first of all playing against the Lions, but also in a preseason game, I think before 2024. Maybe it's before 2025, but Baltimore went to Green Bay and just got wrecked. I mean wrecked. Emmanuel Wilson was on the field for a couple of possessions there. So the running back room doesn't look the same as last year, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, but Jadarion Price brings a lot. The player comps on our website, you guys are obviously going to be familiar with James Cook for Buffalo, maybe not as familiar with Keaton Mitchell, big play rookie in 2023 in Baltimore, undrafted free agent, in fact. And look, if Keaton Mitchell doesn't suffer a horrific leg / knee injury in 2023, I think the Ravens' playoff outcome could be different. Basically, Keaton Mitchell was a guy that year, if you gave him the ball 10 times, 12 times in a game, he was going to score 1 or 2 touchdowns. And I see Jadarion Price the same way. We've got a couple of evaluations on our website, and ironically, both of them are from Seahawks fans or Seahawks analyst Dan Viennes from Seahawks Forever, did a really complete evaluation of Jadarion Price with strengths, weaknesses, and his projections, second round. Dan was, right on point with most of his projections. And then Josh Height, who's got a Twitter account. If you were to click on the link, you could, it would funnel you to that page. Both of those guys did a great job breaking him down. I love the pick. I get it that running back, and especially the number 2 running back in the draft, I've read a couple of people evaluate it and talk about Seattle coming into the draft punting on the 2026 draft. I never thought that made sense. And in hindsight, looking at what they did, grabbing a running back, grabbing a safety, a corner, and a guard, and then going deep on back end of the roster players. At wide receiver, the corner, Emmanuel Henderson from Kansas, 2 corners, Andre Fuller and Michael Dansby from Arizona, and then the D tackle from Minnesota, I, to be honest with you, really know nothing about. All right, so the next guy that John Schneider took, it was at the end of the second round, Bud Clark. Experienced safety, obviously, from TCU. He did play 6 years there, but his 15 interceptions occurred in his last 4 seasons in college. He's a very dangerous, intelligent defensive back. My player comp for him was Kirby Joseph and Marcus Williams, which is high praise if you look at the interception production that those guys had in their NFL career. I think Bud Clark can have an impact in Seattle, and I think it could be early. He's very versatile, oftentimes set up to the field and off coverage, and I think if you were to compare him and Julian Love as far as coverage ability, Love is better, to be honest with you. Clark could be a guy who ends up playing a lot of middle of the field free safety when they go with one high safety structure. The whole group is coming back except for, Kobe Bryant and Reek Witherspoon, obviously. On our website, draftsignal.pro, you can see 2 evaluations that are actually not from Seattle Seahawks analysts or fans. Jason Smith from Huddle It Up Films, and then Karuga Coinage, who's a Baltimore area writer, a professional writer, in fact. And those guys did evaluations of Clark that I think are complimentary now, meaning they wrote the evaluation 5-6 weeks before the draft. So it's not like these evaluations are written in a way to try to sell you as a Seahawks fan on the player, Bud Clark, that was taken at the end of round 2. I will say that he's a somewhat inconsistent tackler. He's not inconsistent as far as his willingness, right? He'll show up, don't get me wrong. But there's some instances where he kind of comes in there to make a tackle and people just bounce off of him. I mean, that happens. You get missed tackles or running backs / tight ends break the tackle. Basically, my point is I don't think Bud Clark is a standout tackler as a rookie in Seattle, but I don't think you need him to be. At the bottom of our page for him, if you're interested in any Bud Clark stuff, we've got interceptions from the last 2 seasons, a game film against SMU. He did actually give up 2 touchdowns in that game. It's about halfway through the video. I'm not going to click on them. You can do that yourself. But about halfway through the video length, which I think is about 3 minutes long, he gets beat pretty bad up the seam, up the right-hand seam, going right to left on the screen. And then finally, game film against Arizona State from 2025. I really like this player. I expect him to play a lot of snaps. They do still have Okada in the building, and he could certainly be a guy who wins that job, right? In the moments or the times or weeks where Okada had to get on the field and start and play a lot, he did some good things. So I like the depth that's been created there through 2 picks without trading back, to my knowledge. I don't think they traded back here. You got a extremely talented home run hitter in Jadarion Price who can step in and start or get on the field a lot. Let's be honest, Kenneth Walker III was a Super Bowl MVP at the end of 2025. But the reality is, even during the regular season last year, him and Zach Charbonnet would, sometimes they would alternate possessions. or even during the course of a game, a week by week, it seemed like certain games was a Charbonnet game or certain games was a Walker game. And so as far as Jadarion Price goes, yeah, there'll be weeks where he only gets 10 or 12 carries. I think there'll also be some weeks where he gets 18 carries, pops 2 touchdowns, and catches 3 or 4 passes through the air. Bud Clark, I think, is going to get the opportunity for more consistent playing time than Price. And I think that's actually a good thing. It's not meant to put down Jadarion Price. It's meant to tell you what I think of Bud Clark. He's tough. He's smart. He's experienced. He's got great hands, great ball skills. In my opinion, he reads things well in match coverages or zone stuff, like Mike McDonald likes to play a lot of at times. I don't think Clark majors in man, and that's why I brought up the coverage ability in man specifically, and comparing or contrasting him and Julian Love. From a Seattle perspective, having just won the Super Bowl, lost 2 of the top 5 DBs, let's put it that way, 1 safety, Bryant, and 1 corner, Reek Woolen. To replace him with a guy as experienced as Bud Clark, I think is a huge development. There was other talented safeties in this draft. I was partial to Tre'Don Stukes, to be honest with you. He's a player that I thought extremely highly of, but generally focused on being a nickel DB. Bud Clark in TCU's structure, which is a unique structure, 3-safety structure, was oftentimes a field side safety, but not the nickel. And in fact, I don't think that he would be as effective a player as a nickel DB. I think he's a third-level defender, whether it's in a 2-high safety structure, which is what Mike McDonald wants to major in and rely on the most, or in a middle-of-the-field free safety alignment post-snap with people playing man or perhaps cover 3. I think things started to get really interesting from a Seattle perspective, really, maybe for the whole draft, somewhere around this round 3 time period. Not that there wasn't intrigue at all earlier in the draft, round 1 included, but Seattle traded back here to get to 99. And I think the pick was from Pittsburgh originally. Look, I really like Julian Neil. My player comp is Cam Hart. Maybe they have a little different style. Neil, I think, is a more physical guy. He certainly has made statements as such, but even the game film provides some information or illustrates that, I should say. It's a great pick, in my opinion, for a guy who's strong, plays with a physical style. He's generally a boundary side corner. And as far as the fit in Seattle goes, I think he's more of a Josh Jobe than a Devin Witherspoon. Certainly no one fits into the Witherspoon category. Very few, I should say, across the NFL landscape as far as talent, impact, versatility, right? Witherspoon can be the outside corner to the field on one snap, and then he can be the nickel DB or slot corner on 3rd and 6. And really, so it really makes it interesting to me what's going to happen. Who's going to be the other outside corner on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, when presumably Witherspoon moves to be the nickel or slot corner set up to the field. Most of Neil's experience is into the boundary. Very physical style, tested well, 4.49 40. We've got 2 evaluations here on the page. And again, Josh Height, who's a Seahawks fan, did a great job. First of all, Josh, I was on a Seahawks show maybe a month before the draft, 3 weeks, something like that. And Josh had amazing comments, observations about players. And so I just said, hey, Josh, send me a message on Twitter and let's see if we can, get something going on our website. And so it really just happened quickly. And he did a evaluation on Julian Neil that you can see here. But of course, at the time that he wrote it, he didn't know that Neil was going to get selected in Seattle. Neither did Jake, who's helped me with this website and done 50% of the work or 40%, while I've done 40%, and the person doing the coding has done 20%. His evaluation, Jake's, lines up with Josh's and my own. If you're interested in film or haven't seen enough yet, there's some interception and then a ton of coverage snaps. First against Ole Miss in the middle, and then Tennessee on the right. I like Julian Neal's game. I like his film. Traded back 3 spots to get him. He's big. He's like almost 6'2", 205 pounds. Played at Arkansas this past year, transferred in from a smaller school. I think mentality-wise and play style, I should say as well, on the field, he fits right in Seattle. You got Nehemiah Pritchett, the 2 7th-round corners that were drafted as well. Josh Jobe, Devin Witherspoon. It's still a very deep and talented secondary. Reality is there is a gaping number of snaps in a given game on a weekly basis that's available for someone, right? Julian Neal's going to have an opportunity to slide into those snaps, those game reps, if you will, early on. Reek Woolen didn't have the interception production after 2022. Obviously, I mean, that was a historic rookie season, right? Things kind of died down from a production standpoint, but he played really well late in the season. I'm talking about Reek Woolen. This is how I interpret the Reek Woolen, Josh Jobe dynamic, or maybe I'll say progression. I think Josh Jobe won the boundary side corner job, but Devin Witherspoon was injured earlier in the season, missed some time. And when Witherspoon came back, Jobe was playing so well that Mike Macdonald was able to have Reek Woolen off the field on some 1st and 10s, and then bring him on and move Witherspoon down to the slot DB position. So the quandary, or the question here for me is, if that's the dynamic this year, and it's Julian Neil, well, hopefully I didn't misspeak at all and say Julian Love when I was referring to the corner from Arkansas, the 3rd round pick. Is it going to be Neil? Is it going to be Nehemiah Pritchett? Would they move Jobe away from boundary side corner? I don't think so. And to me, I do have a little bit of apprehension just projecting Julian Neil to be in a field side corner suddenly when he played mostly to the boundary at Arkansas. Love his talent, love the game, really enjoyed this pick at the end of round 3. And this was pretty much what we were expecting, right? 32, 64, and 96. Although in this case, they traded back from 96 with the Steelers to pick him at 99. Now, what other options are on the board or available to them, I guess I should say? At the time they made that pick, Jermod McCoy, right? He's the very next pick, Jermod McCoy. First thing Saturday, the Raiders picked him with the first selection of round 4, 101. Who knows what you're going to get from Jermod McCoy? From a talent standpoint, Jermod McCoy would start for most teams in the NFL. How that dynamic would work in Seattle, or if, I don't know. I'm not second-guessing the pick because I really like the pick of Julian Neal. I'm just talking about, who else was available. They picked a guard in the 5th round. What was the next guard to go? There's a guard from Oklahoma that goes to Houston. I think the 5th or 6th pick of the 4th round. Jude Bowery, who's actually from Maryland originally, but played at Boston College, could theoretically play some guard. He was a tackle at Boston College. He went to Buffalo. 3 offensive lineman picks in a row at some point in the 4th round. Cage Casey from Boise State, Drew Shelton from Penn State, and then Jalen Farmer, the guard from Kentucky. So, maybe Seattle could have went guard here, but then the problem is what corners would be available to you later on, right? Seattle only had a limited number of picks. I love what they did in round 1 with Price, round 2 with Bud Clark, round 3 with Julian Neal. Again, if you haven't done so already, draftsignal.pro is our website. If you don't want to read an evaluation that I think will line up with kind of what I'm saying, you can check out the film for yourself, which is at the bottom of his player profile page. I'm a big fan of what John Schneider and company did next. Well, I say did next, right? They picked Julian Neal at the end of round 3. And again, talking about the options that were available on the board, that's not to second guess the selection of Julian Neal. It's just to give you some context about what was out there and maybe what other options or ideas were available or was brought up probably in the front office. I love the fact that they traded back in to the 5th round. Again, I think they traded with the Browns. Bo Stevens, first team All-American. And the fact that they gave up a 4th in next year's draft is really cool because I believe Seattle is in line before trading that pick. Well, excuse me, let me rephrase. I believe Seattle is in line for 3 or 4 comp picks in the 2020 draft, right? Boye Mafe, Reek Woolen, and then Kenneth Walker III. So, maybe each one of those is not a 4th round pick. So perhaps I'm a little bit off base there. The idea here is, if you ask me, they feel like they can give away or trade away their 4th round pick to go get a guy who, based on my research, was a pretty good football player. In fact, One of my family members, his son plays in the SEC and goes to every single SEC game, and in fact was at 2 Iowa games this year. I have no idea how that actually happened, but he told me about Bo Stevens like halfway through the year. Of course, Bo Stevens ended up testing with shorter arms, or really short. I will point you to the 2 evaluations on our website to kind of give you some idea about Bo Stevens. Chris Aguilera and Edgar Allen are both Ravens content creators or analysts. Chris Aguilera did the bulk of the offensive line evaluations on our site. Most of them are 2 or 3 paragraphs, to the point and accurate, if you ask me. I like Bo Stevens' game, but EA Edgar Allen, who I do a lot of content production with, he's kind about it, but he's also very honest. He said that it might be a consideration to move to center, and Chris Aguilera also mentioned that maybe he's more effective in a lateral zone scheme that requires some high-end mobility. But look, Iowa's multiple, right? I think the film from Iowa gave Seattle's front office a really good idea of what they could do here. At minimum, I agree with Chris that I think Stevens, a reliable high-floor guard, and in this case, he obviously fits as a guy who could compete with Sam Bradford. I'm certainly not going to punch at Sam Bradford, in a literal sense or verbally here in this video, but the reality is the relative weakness of the offensive line is right guard. And it makes sense to me that they would say, okay, let's go ahead and try to improve the competition level, strengthen the floor and the depth. I like to use the phrase strengthen the floor. I don't think Bo Stevens raises the floor. I think he strengthens it, meaning if one of the guards goes down and Bo Stevens is not a starter, if he doesn't win one of the jobs coming out of camp, then you can get things done with Bo Stevens. He's essentially plug and play as a guard. Again, I believe it was the first team All-American, 6'5", 310, 312 pounds, well, 315 on our website. And I think you got pretty good evaluations by these 2 guys. I trust what John Schneider and those guys did with those first 4 picks. I do not pretend, however, to have a whole bunch of knowledge about either of the last 4 guys. Emmanuel Henderson, the receiver from Kansas, Fuller and Dansby, the corners from Toledo and Arizona, and then Devin Eastern, the defensive tackle from Minnesota. In the end, for me, I'm a little unwilling to put a grade on this draft, and here's why. On the Night 1 stream, I asked Derek, who's a Seahawks fan and joined us for a little while, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Did John Schneider need to hit another home run? Actually, he didn't hit a home run in 2025. He hit a grand slam, right? Not just the draft picks, but also the free agent acquisitions in the offseason. Cooper Kupp, DeMarcus Lawrence, Sam Darnold, of course, as well. But then during the season, trading for Rashid Shaheed. I don't think Schneider needed to hit a grand slam or even a home run in this draft. Nonetheless, I think it's a really good group. It just adds to the depth of the team. And in fact, if you look at, Torrey Horton, he'll return from injury and provide, I think, a spectacular wide receiver group with JSN, Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed, Horton, and then they chose to bring back Jake Bobo, which I thought was a great move, in my opinion. They've already got a deep tight end group. Josh Jones provides depth on the offensive line. In fact, he did have to start a game, I think, in the playoffs, or maybe it was later in the regular season. My apologies for that. Christian Haynes has been disappointing as a guard, and in fact, he's a PG County kid from Maryland, someone whose career I have tracked since he was at, I think it was UConn, and, things just have not worked out at the pro level. Bo Stevens looks like direct competition for him and or Anthony Bradford. Basically, I think that Seattle has strengthened the floor in this draft and addressed the known gaps or openings in the roster. Running back, or starting running back, if you will, between Price and Emmanuel Wilson until Charbonnet is healthy. Safety, Bud Clark, even though I think, Okada is listed as a starter right now on their website. And then finally, Julian Neil, the third corner, if you will. But they play Nick Emanwari at the nickel, so certainly on a ton of 3rd and 6s, they could just keep the base defense on the field. But what they really like to do, what Mike McDonald, I think, really likes to do, is move Devin Witherspoon to the nickel slot corner to the field and then Nick Emanwari become the will linebacker, essentially get another high-level coverage guy on the field. It's just a question of who that will be. Julian Neil, Nehemiah Pritchett. Don't know a ton about Shamar John Charles. Andre Fuller is the Toledo corner they drafted in the 7th round. Michael Dansby, the other 7th round corner. Basically, this depth chart or this roster didn't need much. Right? They didn't need much at all. I'm really impressed with the awareness, understanding of going out and getting a potential high-level backup / starter at guard in Bo Stevens, because John Schneider, I think, correctly identifies that that's the relative weakness of the offensive front. When you go across from left to right, Charles Cross, Gray Zabel, Jalen Sundell, who was a UDFA but played next to Zabel, I think, for 2 years in college, and then Anthony Bradford at right guard and Abraham Lucas at right tackle. I like what they did in this draft. I don't have as much critique here as I do of like Detroit and Baltimore's. Why is that? Because the Ravens and the Lions needed more. They needed to get more done. Seattle could have, well, to use a word or phrase that I really didn't enjoy hearing before the draft, they could have punted on this to a certain extent. Maybe they could have only addressed running back and then been a little bit later on safety and stockpiled on some 4th and 5th round picks. Essentially, I'm advocating or talking about, a trade back scenario from 32, to get to 38 or 40, somewhere in that range, and recoup another 4th or maybe a couple of 5th round picks and supplement the roster in that way. I like the option that John Schneider chose. Well, maybe he was forced to. No one chose to trade up with him at 32. It sounded like he was open to it. I think if I read correctly, he only got one option. Basically, this team didn't need a whole lot. The only thing not addressed here at all, potentially, right, is edge defender. Letting Boye Mafe go. I think Uchenna Nwosu is in the last season of his contract. DeMarcus Lawrence, some rumors that he was possibly going to retire after winning the Super Bowl. You do, of course, still have Derek Hall on the roster. They like Connor O'Toole, and Jared Ivey was someone who tested poorly 2 years ago prior to the draft, or he tested poorly at the Combine. But Seattle, I think, chose to protect both of those guys as potential edge defenders. Maybe they address it before the trade deadline if they need to, right? If they're not getting to the quarterback. I don't think that Boye Mafe had that much of an impact with the pass rush last year. A lot of it was generated from the interior. And, Nwosu, DeMarcus Lawrence, who was he played like a bat out of hell, and Derek Hall, they, occasionally those guys handed things off to each other as far as developing or generating pressure. I like what they did in this draft. It wasn't a grand slam by any shape of the, by any, way of looking at it or perspective at all, but it didn't need to be. Mike Macdonald and this team already have a group that's ready to go. The questions about, is the offense going to continue to run smoothly without Clint Kubiak, without Kenneth Walker, without Zach Charbonnet, for a little while, hopefully has been answered, if you ask me, by getting a starting caliber running back and then strengthening or upgrading or raising the floor, strengthening the floor, and raising it perhaps at the same time with Bo Stevens. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comment section, number one. Number two, what was your perspective going into the draft as far as what was your perspective on Seattle possibly, quote, punting on this draft coming in? And then what they ended up doing, kind of supplementing the end of the roster. I understand that some people say, well, really all they did was, secure their UDFAs, free agent signings a little bit sooner or more officially with those late 7th round picks. Appreciate you guys' time. If you think other Seahawks fans would enjoy, my discussion here with some analysis of the players and the options that were out there during the draft, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.